probably think that a world without Squidward would be a happier Bikini Bottom, but it is way more complex than that. And left me wondering, is Squidward just an irritated character to bring balance to the maniacal SpongeBob and Patrick, or is his presence holding back a larger evil? There is one character his absence affects in a profoundly horrific way. Without Squidward ever being born, Bikini Bottom feels out of balance. Sure, his personality might have been a lot most of the time, but Squidward's disdain for SpongeBob and Patrick gave their nitwitted shenanigans an extra layer of chaos. He was their unwilling participant in every chaotic jellyfishing adventure and bubble-blowing debacle. His reactions weren't just meaningless cynicism, they were the glue holding Bikini Bottom's wild energy together. Now, without Squidward torturing his poor clarinet and rolling his eyes till his skull muscles spasm, something's missing. A certain je ne sais quoi, which means, well, I don't actually know what that means. SpongeBob's life is mostly the same, except for the fact that SpongeBob now does all of the duties in the Krusty Krab, because he's willing and, well, cheap. And as for him and Patrick, their houses are now just too close to each other. Without Squidward's house in the middle, which used to serve as a bit of a barrier between the, let's call it, eccentricities of the Sponge and Starfish duo, so although they stay good friends, they get more and more irritated with each other's company, and slowly they grow identities of their own, especially Patrick, because what else is he gonna do? But there is one character Squidward's absence affects the most. His arch-nemesis, Squilliam. Squidward's old high school rival and self-proclaimed beacon of sophistication now stands unchallenged. He's no longer competing with Squidward's mediocre talent or one-sided jealousy. Without Squidward's nerves to work on, Squilliam's victories feel hollow. Who cares about being the best when there's no one to prove it to? He needs to go bigger. Much, much bigger. That'll make everyone see him for the god he is. So here's where it gets really good. After selling all his fancy things, his gilded doorknob, golden toilet, and even water B&Bing the top level of his 3-story house. That's Bikini Bottom's version of Airbnb, by the way. But anyway, cash in hand, he heads off to make the deal of his lifetime. He has a secret meeting with Mr. Krabs, late at night in the Krusty Krab after closing time. If anyone was near, they would have first heard screams and shouts, and more screams, and then finally silence. Somehow, he convinced Mr. Krabs of the unthinkable, selling the Krusty Krab. But what else happened in there remains a mystery. For now. Yes, to fill the void, Squilliam goes all in on dominating Bikini Bottom. He buys the Krusty Krab, renaming it the Fancy Krab, complete with velvet ropes, chandeliers, and a dress code that bans shorts, flip-flops, and gorilla costumes. He swaggers through Bikini Bottom like a king, but deep down, Squilliam can't shake the nagging thought, what is greatness without someone to envy it? He quickly shakes off that nagging feeling and takes his list out of his pocket. The Fancy Krab is only the beginning. Soon, he'll own the boating school, the kelp shake, glove world, and even the chum bucket. While he dreams of domination, Bikini Bottom's residents start to feel the ripples of this void, which has now been filled with the heavily eyebrowed octopus. SpongeBob throws himself into his work with even more gusto, desperate to impress his new fancy boss. Patrick, left without Squidward to antagonize, decides to class up his own life to fit Squilliam's standards, leading to hilarious tuxedo-wearing disasters. And Squilliam, well, for someone who claims to be above it all, he's starting to feel that something's not right. Why can't he shake that feeling? With Squilliam now ruling Bikini Bottom's social scene and SpongeBob and Patrick left to their own devices, things start to unravel fast. Without Squidward to begrudgingly endure his endless optimism, SpongeBob latches onto Squilliam as his new idol. In his eyes, Squilliam is the pinnacle of class and sophistication, someone to emulate. Determined to impress his new boss, SpongeBob tries to transform himself into a high-class employee of the Fancy Crab. His efforts lead to absolute chaos, balancing trays of extra Krabby Patties stacked like modern art, practicing overly elaborate greetings for customers, and attempting to play the clarinet during work breaks in Squilliam's honor, which, interestingly, is even worse than Squidward's playing, if someone of that name existed. Side note, the extra Krabby Patties are a limited menu item, and Mr. Krabs is nowhere to be found at this stage of the story. Make of that what you will. But now that I think of it, Squilliam did mention that Mr. Krabs was on a long overdue holiday on the island. Anyway, Squilliam, while initially amused by SpongeBob's enthusiasm, quickly becomes tired the fuck out. SpongeBob's antics start scaring away customers who came to bask in Squilliam's refined establishment. Fancy patrons don't appreciate a server who occasionally bursts into song mid-order or gets tangled in a chandelier while trying to demonstrate fancy table flips.
An electric charge, the sound in your head is brutal.
Without someone to absorb and react to that unhinged energy, SpongeBob is just a person that really needs professional help. Patrick, on the other hand, spirals into confusion. He knows there's something missing, but can't put his finger on it. He decides he needs to level up his life to fit into Squilliam's world and his best friend's new lifestyle. So he shows up to the Fancy Crab in a too small tuxedo, monocle in hand, demanding the finest extra Krabby Patties on the menu. When Squilliam denies him entry for being an uncultured starfish, Patrick is not impressed. And that night, just before SpongeBob closed up shop, he snuck in and grabbed an extra Krabby Patty. The moment he took a bite, his brain went into full-on alarm mode. This patty wasn't vegetarian like the old Krabby Patties. There was meat in it, and he was gonna find out who that meat had belonged to. Meanwhile, as the hole left by Squidward's absence grows bigger, Squilliam's influence takes over, turning Bikini Bottom into a snobby playground of pretentiousness and exclusivity. But this affects more people than just SpongeBob and Patrick, and in bizarre ways which lead to more and more catastrophes. Mrs. Puff is forced to open a luxury boating academy to cater to Squilliam's vision of refinement. And she has to do this with money she doesn't have, so she has to go to a literal loan shark. SpongeBob's failures escalate as he attempts to parallel park in a gilded boat while wearing a too tall top hat and two monocles taped together, which is not a sufficient replacement for his driving glasses. The boat did not make it, and neither will Mrs. Puff if she can't pay back those sharks. But there's an even darker side to the Bikini Bottom's new shiny facade. Sandy grows increasingly frustrated with Squilliam's disregard for the environment, as his fancy events leave Bikini Bottom littered with sequins, velvet ropes, and half-empty wine glasses. The two clash in an epic debate at Goo Lagoon, with Squilliam smugly dismissing her scientific arguments, which he really should not have done. You don't mess with a rabid squirrel. I learned that the hard way. But more than that, there is an air of not rightness. Is that a word? One by one, the Krusty Krab regulars start to feel out of place in this fancy Bikini Bottom. Squilliam's success starts to alienate the very community he claims to elevate. While Squilliam projects confidence, the lack of real opposition starts to weigh on him. Without someone like Squidward, there's no one to envy his wealth or achievements, no one to scorn or compare himself to. The joy of winning fades when there's no one to lose to. Squilliam begins to wonder, am I really as great as I think I am? As Squilliam's reign over Bikini Bottom grows, the cracks in his facade become impossible to ignore. The chaos caused by SpongeBob's relentless admiration of Squilliam, Patrick going through everyone's trash at night looking for clues, and the general alienation of Bikini Bottom's residents leave Squilliam more irritable and isolated than ever. Pearl is seen stapling posters all over Bikini Bottom that say, "Have you seen this crab?" Because, yo, where the hell is Mr. Krabs, by the way? Squilliam decides he needs to get order back. He needs everyone to love him, and he attempts this with his stupidest idea yet. It all comes to a climax during Squilliam's grandest event yet, a self-celebratory concert he's billed as the most refined night in Bikini Bottom history, hosted by your favorite octopus. This confused most of the attendees because they didn't even know they had a favorite octopus. The Krusty Krab, the Fancy Crab, is decked out with chandeliers, a red carpet, and Squilliam's face plastered on every surface. SpongeBob and Patrick are, of course, on the entertainment lineup. SpongeBob determined to impress Squilliam and prove his sophistication, and Patrick carrying a bedazzled kazoo and devastating information about extra Krabby Patties. When the moment comes, SpongeBob breaks out in a sweet rock ballad that's still stuck in my head.
It's the thrill of one more kill.
And the crowd went bananas. Where he got the time to write and practice that song is a mystery, with him working the grill, the cash register, and serving customers all at the same time at the Fancy Crab. Patrick, not shown here to spare your ears, did a solo on a super glittery kazoo, and he thought all the cheering was for him. But the adrenaline from the show gives him the gusto he needs to share the horrible conclusion he came to after eating the extra Krabby Patty and doing some detective work, which he will soon do. Meanwhile, Squilliam is surprised that everything worked out so well, but for the first time he feels not triumphant, but empty, and he lashes out. In a fit of confused rage, he starts screaming at the crowd, calling them basic, of all things. Taken aback and fed up with Squilliam's pretentiousness, everyone finally pushes back. They just want to be normal fish again, and suddenly all their different grievances come to light. Sandy protests Squilliam's exclusionary rules and his disregard for the community's rustic charm. Mrs. Puff, who doesn't want to become shark food, demands payment from Squilliam, and the once loyal residents of the Fancy Crab bear signs chanting, "Bring back the extra Krabby Patties," because that's the one part of the Fancy Crab they did like. SpongeBob, not really understanding the situation, just kinda jumps from one group to the next and yells what they're yelling. And then it happens. Okay, I'm gonna try to do a Patrick voice. Quiet! The extra Krabby Patties are actually extra Mr. Krabs patties. You've been eating Mr. Krabs! The various mobs look stunned. Pearl is in tears. Squilliam, now overwhelmed, tries to regain control, but as the chaos peaks, he finds himself standing alone on the stage. The image of his perfect Bikini Bottom is shattered. His once flawless confidence crumbles as he realizes his success was never about true greatness, but about outshining everyone around him. If he just had someone specific, perhaps another octopus, to rate himself against, he could have been different. Without that rivalry, he has nothing to measure himself against. But epiphanies like these mean less than a whale's blowhole, while the police are carrying you away, which they did. With Squilliam gone, the Krusty Krab reverts to its original, imperfect glory, now run by Patrick, just because with his tucks, that felt like the most natural thing to do. SpongeBob returns to flipping Krabby Patties with renewed enthusiasm, and even Sandy, still annoyed at Squilliam's environmental mess, smiles at the restored harmony of Bikini Bottom. When Mr. Krabs finally returns from his holiday on the island, he says, "What did I miss?" And Patrick replies, "Not much," having forgotten completely that just days ago he accused Squilliam of putting Mr. Krabs on the menu. Mr. Krabs is of course beyond himself with joy because he got paid for the sale of the Krusty Krab and now he has it back as well. Now that's a good deal. Without Squidward being born, Bikini Bottom was thrown into chaos, but even more surprising, Squilliam Fancy Son, our so-called symbol of success, learned a harsh truth. Greatness means nothing without someone to measure it against, and in that absence, darker traits might emerge. Squidward may not have been loved, but his absence proved one thing: even the grumpiest octopus has a purpose. Stay tuned for our next dive into the wildest what-ifs in Bikini Bottom.